G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. And fresh from San Diego, California comes the only sunglasses brand that I'm ever going to wear again. I'm talking about Blenders Eyewear, and you're going to be just as hooked when you see just how awesome these shades are. I got the Black Tundra Sunnies, and they're exactly what I was looking for. From a super comfortable fit to the strength of the shades, I couldn't be happier with what I received. They're absolutely perfect to wear when I'm out jogging or hiking because they have a really snug fit and they don't bounce around or fall off. They're also super lightweight and comfortable. In fact, the other day when I was exercising, I nearly forgot that I had them on. Chase Fisher started Blenders by selling his beachy shades out of a backpack while doubling as a surf instructor on Pacific Beach. His goal? To create an adventurous mid-priced eyewear option with the same cool factor as other leading styles. Unlike expensive big brand shades that you've probably lost or smashed in the past, Blenders are actually really affordable, so you're not going to cry as much when the inevitable happens. Blenders' team of in-house designers are constantly coming out with new styles, from orange polarized wraparounds, tortoiseshell frames with purple lenses, to classic gold frames on black lens. And it's not just sunglasses too. Blenders has prescription glasses, readers, and blue lights, as well as a snow collection with goggles and accessories. Live life in forward motion with Blenders today. To score 15% off your Blenders purchase, visit blenderseyewear.com and enter the promo code SCAREDVIP. That's blenderseyewear.com, code SCAREDVIP for 15% off. Blenders, rocked with pride worldwide. My parents recently bought a farm last year in Australia and have been building a property on it for their retirement. It's right beside a national park and reasonably close to the next property over. The only thing that sucked is that we have no cell service besides the top paddock where they're building their house. Not too dodgy though, right? Well, I'm a university student, 21, female, in my second year of nursing and frequently come up to the farm to help them out with their livestock and whatnot. At first, everything was fine. We had a small 2-bedroom cabin in the lower paddock that I stayed in every time that I came up. My room had a large window that faced into the national park, and at night when it was pitch black, it would freak me out a bit, but nothing serious. Sure, we had the usual noises of foxes and the livestock at night time and stuff like that, but it was really nothing out of the ordinary. But things really ramped up when I had to stay up there alone to feed the livestock for a few days while my parents were back in the city. I went about the usual chores, feeding the sheep, keeping an eye on our lambs, and checking in at the building site to keep an eye on everything. I went into town to get some dinner at the local pub, and by the time that I got home it was roughly 10 p.m. I would usually take my car up to the top paddock at night to call my friends, check social media, etc. My car was lit up by my internal navigation system that's always on, which meant that I couldn't really see outside the car besides from my headlights. I must have been midway through my social media scroll when I thought that I saw something black flash across the paddocks where my headlights were facing. At that, I drove my car in a quick circle to use my car's headlights as a massive torch and didn't see anything. No reflections of cattle's eyes like I usually do, or the usual fox or rabbit. I tried not to pay too much attention to it and went back to my social media scroll until I accidentally pressed my brakes, which allowed my brake lights to flood the paddock behind my car with an eerie red light. And the same black flash that I saw through my windshield flickered out of the corner of my eye in the rearview mirror. Now I was getting suspicious. I turned off the music I was listening to and just sat for a second, trying to assure myself that I was just tired. And after a few seconds of silence, I was relieved and was about to turn my car on to go back to my cabin, and that's when I heard what I can only describe as claws on my rear windshield, sort of like a tap-tap-scratch pattern. Now, I can tell you that I have never sped as fast as I did back to the cabin that night. That night, too, I just couldn't shake the feeling of something watching me from the forest. You know that sort of tingling sense of something staring into the back of your head that you get sometimes? Well, After tossing and turning, I put up a newspaper in front of my window that faces the woods until it was completely covered, and the feeling immediately went away. Sleep didn't come easy, safe to say that night. The following night, I chose to go to the top paddock while it was still reasonably light. All was peaceful, and I had all but forgotten last night's events. I was admiring the gorgeous pink sunset when I saw a flash of green in the sky travel for a split second and then disappear. Now listen, I'm not one for UFOs, but I know that it wasn't a helicopter because it was light enough to see the sky and the stars weren't even up yet. I thought that it was cool though, so I called one of my friends who was a massive skeptic about everything paranormal, and of course she thought that I was nuts and proceeded to give me a hard time for it. It started to get a bit dark for my liking though, so I went back to the cabin to cook some dinner. All was fine too until I went to sleep. The newspaper from the night before was still clinging to my window, but I woke up at around, I would say 2 a.m. I would guess, to the sound of the sheep making a racket. I grabbed my dad's rifle, assuming it was another fox, and went to take a look on foot with my spotlight. Now, usually when you bring a very bright light and you mess with the sheep who were already going nuts, you hear about it. Key word being usually. I walked over to the paddock and I sort of started scanning with my spotlight and didn't see anything. The sheep were bleating like crazy, but none were injured or even remotely in a corner of the paddock, huddled together like they usually do when there's a fox. That was until they all just suddenly went completely silent. I mean, 1 second they were so loud that they echoed around the hills, and the next it was just completely dead silent. And now I was truly scared. I raised my rifle and started looking around, feeling like everything around me had its eyes on me. It was then, too, as I heard a thump of something heavy being dropped on the ground, heavy enough for me to even feel the vibration in my feet. And at that, I booked it back to the cabin and locked everything behind me. I was pacing around double-checking the doors and the windows when I heard it too. It sounded like humming, but distorted alongside footsteps. And whatever these footsteps were, it was as if they were limping and then sort of quickly recovering. It was around the cabin, and it stopped at my bedroom window. I curled to the ground, gripping my rifle until my fingers were frozen in place. And I laid there pretty much all night until I was so exhausted that eventually I just fell asleep. I left first thing in the morning without even looking to see if there were any footsteps. Now, if anyone has any clue as to what the heck I just experienced, what this thing is, or can tell me what I can do, then please do comment below and let me know. I haven't been able to go back to my parents' farm, which I really regret that, but hopefully I can return soon. So I work in a large bunker complex from World War II, and I stayed for a night shift the other day. I'm an editor, so I had headphones on most of the time. Every now and then, though, I could have swore that I heard some music from somewhere, but brushed it off as just me being tired. At around 1 a.m., I went for a smoke in an area that basically only me and my bosses can access. It's an old stairwell used to transport heavy cargo that doesn't fit in any elevator. As I approached the door, I once again heard music, but this time it was clear as day. As I opened the door, it got really, really loud too, like as if someone was sitting with a violin at the bottom of the stairwell or something. I work in the 4th floor. No other floor has direct access to the stairwell except the very bottom. Needless to say, I was weirded out, but thought, whoa, maybe some composer uses their free time and practices here? Yeah, I know, kind of stupid assumption, but the only explanation that I had in the moment. The semi-social person that I am, I went down to see who was playing and say hello, since the music was actually, well, kind of nice. It reminded me a bit of the classical BioShock music and was, as far as I can tell, played by one single person on one violin. However, after I stepped down like 4 or 5 steps, the music just abruptly stopped. Not in the way that you stop a recording, too. I could actually hear clattering and sort of sounds from the handling of a string instrument. I went down all the way and looked for any open doors or some way for this person to have gotten in there, but there was nothing and nobody in sight that would suggest someone just played the music there. So, kind of disappointed, I went all the way back up. The bunker's floors are about double the normal height, so I had to walk up around 6 floors. But just as I stepped into our hallway, the music started again. So I went down again, and surely enough, there was no one there. At that point, too, my confusion turned into being kind of creeped out a bit. I double-checked if every door was locked, which they were, and if the elevator, which had been out for service for a while, worked again. Maybe that's how they got here? But no, it was still stuck below ground floor as it had almost been for a year now. So I thought, okay, every door is locked and the only way in here is to have a key through one of the doors on each floor, 5 floors in total. So I went back up and waited, since I was sure to hear someone unlock a door and step into the stairwell. But no. I reached the top, and at eerily that precise moment, I heard weird violin sounds, like someone mildly plucking the strings. Then the music set in again, and it was loud, like really loud this time, sharp and aggressive too. So I went down again, only to find nothing again. At that point, I was actually wondering if I was just too exhausted and started to hallucinate or something. That's how I explained the music to me for the rest of the night anyway. It was only the next morning that my stupid brain realized that I recorded the music the first time that I heard it loudly, so there's no chance of this being just in my head. Can anyone explain what the heck might have been going on? Any theories? Because I'm really confused. During a school break, me and my mum and one of my older brothers, we went to go and visit our uncle on his ranch in Nevada. I have trouble sleeping at the best of times, so one night I decided to walk around the perimeter of the ranch, just for some fresh air. I had made it all the way to the other side of the ranch too, to the far end of the pastures. From the last fence to a woodsy hill area, it is about 50 yards, I guess. I decided to stay and look up in the grassy area to look at the stars, and what no one told this city girl was that with no trees and no lights, save for the barn on the other side of the ranch, you can see so many stars. It was breathtaking to see the universe like that, in fact. I started whistling at one point, and then I heard a branch crack, so I stopped, a little startled by that. Then something else started to whistle right at me. I froze, and it seemed like every hair on my body stood straight up. I couldn't move, and the whistling got louder, and also got closer as well. It was the almost exact same nonsense melody that I was whistling not even 15 seconds ago. I know what you're thinking, but birds are a thing, right? No, there was no way that this was a bird. I know the difference between a bird and whatever the heck this was, and this isn't even over yet. So I, the stupid girl in the horror movie, decided to say, hello? And something said, hello, right back to me, in my own voice. And yes, I know what my voice sounds like. Slightly raspy, faint, Bronx accent, usually lower pitched unless I'm excited or mad. And then it's usually so high pitched that my friends say that I sound like Harley Quinn. Another branch snapped, and that was my cue to book it. Back down around the paddocks, back to the barn and to the main house, which was about maybe 2 acres, I would guess. But the whole thing was like a blur to me. I have knee issues from a car crash, but I didn't feel even an ache as I sprinted all the way back to the main house. To this day, I still don't know what it was. I didn't tell anyone else about it too, despite my mum being extremely superstitious. I did a little bit of frantic Googling the day after, obviously, and the closest thing that I could come up with was actually a skinwalker. I was born and grew up in a town called Shrewsbury in Shropshire, England. The town has a reputation of being one of the most haunted places in the world. The town is well over 1,000 years old. A lot of the ruins of the old buildings remain, even in the town centre. Everyone I know growing up had some sort of an experience, haunted or otherwise, at some point in their lives there too. So, getting to my most haunted experience that spans a number of years, these aren't my only experiences, but this is the one that has affected me the most. My grandparents have a house in the Bellevue area of the town that all of the family, my mother and her siblings, grew up in. This house has a back bedroom that gives off a vibe that you just don't want to mess with. It's the only room in the house that has the door always closed and is now used as a storeroom that my nan refuses to enter alone. It was used when I was a kid as a spare bedroom for when me and my brother would stay over, but we hated being in that room. One night, though, me and my brother were asleep in there, and I woke up just in time to look over to see the light fixture on the ceiling next to my bed. I can even remember the feeling of the cold plaster touching my cheek right before whatever the heck was lifting me let me go. I hit the mattress and immediately started screaming, obviously, and my dad burst into the room to find out what happened. I told him everything, but he was obviously very skeptical. But I even remember him saying that the room was very cold, even though the heating was on, and there was an odd feeling that he couldn't explain. My brother, who was asleep during my incident, said that he had a dream that night of an old man standing over him shouting for him to get out, and to this day he's reluctant to talk about it because of how real it felt. Now, this is where it starts to get worse, because I was told this was like over a month after the first incident, but I was at home in my house, the other side of the town, and it happened again. Me and my brother at this time used bunk beds, and I slept on the top bunk. My dad was downstairs watching TV, and all of a sudden he said that he got a feeling that something was wrong, then realized the feeling that he felt was the same as it was when I had the incident at my nan's. He ran upstairs, burst into the room, just in time to catch me falling from the ceiling. I had apparently been picked up, lifted over the bed's safety rail, and was hanging with my head tilted towards the ground, and my dad burst in to see me hanging there in midair for a split second, before dropping, and he actually caught me just in time. He was terrified and could never explain what happened, and nothing ever happened again. Until I was in my mid-20s, that is. My nan was heading out somewhere for an overnight stay, so I said that I would stay the night, feed the dogs, and sleep on the sofa and whatnot. I did everything stated, went to sleep on the sofa, but woke up in the morning in the spare room, at the back of the room behind a load of storage boxes. It took me 5 minutes of moving the boxes out of my way to reach the door to actually get out, and to this day, now 14 years later, I still have no idea how the heck I got into that room, over those boxes and to the back section of the room without damaging anything. I've never been more confused and frightened after waking up in all my life, and I've never stayed another night in that house since then. My nan refuses to talk about that room. My granddad was the same prior to his death. I have no idea what happened in that house, what spirit or worse or whatever it is living back in that back room. But I'll never go back in that room for as long as I live. I grew up in a sleepy suburb in South Carolina in an upper middle class neighborhood. The neighborhood was built on the side of a small antebellum period slave plantation that had fallen to decay more than a century ago. My house was situated directly across the street from the plantation's old cemetery. I put that in quotes because there are no headstones, only crudely cut rocks that signified where people were already buried. There was only one bedroom in our house that overlooked the cemetery, and it was the one that I slept in as a child. When I was very young, I would always comment on seeing shadow people, dark humanoid shapes that would dance in and out of your peripheral vision. I'd be sitting in the living room playing with my DS or something like that, and see something walk across the adjoining kitchen, only to look up and see nothing. This was also a relatively common occurrence in this house. The worst thing, though, was the nightmares that I'd have in my childhood bedroom. Man, the nightmares. Before I was old enough to even watch my first horror movie, I would have these intense, graphic dreams. Nothing a child's brain should be able to conjure up like that. I had one reoccurring dream too, where I would go to the bathroom only to find a person void of any skin weeping in a blood-filled bathtub. Yeah, terrible nightmares. The dreams were often hyper-realistic too, and would take place in my home with no alterations. I would often refuse to sleep in that room as well. The house was 2 stories, and I would often just fall asleep on a patch of carpet next to the stairs. When my sister moved out, I finally got out of that room. The nightmares and the insomnia stopped too, almost instantaneously. That room is used as my dad's office space now. I always make an effort to shut the door every night before I go to bed, but when I wake up to use the bathroom, it's always open without fail. I admit that it could be a draft, but the problem continued even after we replaced the doorknob. Even in the blazing hot South Carolina summer, that room too is always freezing cold. It'd be easy to chalk it up to childhood superstition, I know, but the strange occurrences continued well into my late teens. Now, my parents were always out of town on business, leaving 17-year-old me to my own devices for weeks at a time sometimes. I hated being in that house too alone, so I'd always have a few people spending the night while they were gone. My house began to build a bit of a reputation with my circle of friends as well. The first instance that I can think of was in my junior year of high school. I was with 4 friends and we decided to grab a pizza. One of the other friends decided to stay at the house and watch some TV and just keep an eye on my dog. And about 10 minutes after we left, I got a call from my friend and he seems genuinely shaken and told me to hurry up. It's about 10:30 p.m. at this point. He had put my dog on his leash and they were both standing in the driveway of my house when we got back. He said that shortly after we left, he heard loud banging coming from the upstairs of my house. We have a long hallway on the 2nd story, and he said that it sounded like multiple people running full sprint from one side to the other, just over and over again. My dog was apparently going ballistic, and he grabbed his leash, and the both of them just ran outside. Needless to say, he wasn't willing to stay that night. Another instance is just me and one of my friends. My parents had been out of town for a few days, so we were just having some brews and playing COD or something on the TV in my living room. It was getting super late, so we put on a movie and we sort of conked out after about an hour. I left him on the couch and went to sleep in my bedroom. But at around 3:30, I get shaken awake by my terrified friend. He said that he woke up and was freezing cold, so he walked upstairs to grab a blanket out of the linen closet. He said that when he closed the door, he could barely make out my dog in front of him. My friend called to him and reached out his hand to pet him, but when he did, the shadow sort of drifted across the ground towards him and went through his legs. Not through the middle of his legs, like physically through his legs. He asked me to feel them too, and they were icy to the touch. We both just sort of hung out in the living room with pretty much every light in the house on after that. But the last story that I have has to do with my dog and my childhood bedroom about 2 years ago. My parents were yet again out of town and asked me to dog sit the floofer, and of course I obliged. It was around 9:30 on a hot summer night, and my dog just starts going absolutely ballistic for some reason and running around in circles almost like he was chasing something. He bolted it upstairs, still barking, until I hear him make it to the far side of the house, near my childhood bedroom, and the next thing that I hear is the door slam shut. It was incredibly loud, and there was obviously a lot of force behind it. Then all I could hear was him shrieking, almost like he was in severe pain. He's a fairly large lab husky chow mix, and I've never heard him make a sound like this. I, terrified, sprinted up the stairs after him and opened up the door to let him out. He came thundering out of the room and was desperately clawing at the door to the backyard. And I couldn't get him to come inside for like 2 days after that, leaving his food and water outside for him. Now, I mark myself as the superstitious type, but only because so much weird stuff has happened to me in that house throughout the years. I just get an angry foreboding feeling when I come back home these days. Am I crazy for believing that there's something else that I can't explain in that house? I felt insane until my friend started to see and experience the same stuff that I did. My mum won't even have a conversation with me about the prospect of something malicious being in that upstairs office space. And although this is extremely long-winded, I could honestly write a novel with how many more stories I have about this house. But I'll leave it for here for now, and I'm just wondering if there's anyone else living in the Deep South that has experienced anything like this, like seeing shadow people and stuff like that. I'd love for all of this to be easily dismissible, and on their own each story is, I guess, but with the years and years of strange occurrences, I just can't chalk it up to coincidence anymore. Anyways, that's my story or stories. I'm just confused and struggling to make sense of any of this. Hopefully somebody can shed a little bit of light at least on what's going on, either in that house or perhaps even the cemetery across the street. You know, I thought that I knew my mum better than anyone. But one day recently, we were chatting and I heard a story that I'd never heard before. She told me that she almost got a part in a famous Hollywood movie some years back. And that got me wondering, how many other stories don't I know? But that's why I got my mum Storyworth. Storyworth is an online service that helps you and your loved ones connect through sharing stories and memories and preserves them for years to come. Every week, Storyworth emails your mum a thought-provoking question of your choice from a vast pool of possible options. Each unique prompt asks questions that you've never really thought of, like, what are your greatest achievements, or were there any similarities between me and you as children? I've really enjoyed reading my mum's answers to those questions too. I've discovered stories and memories I'd never heard about, and learned new things about stories I thought that I really knew, like the fact that me and my mum both like collecting coins from a young age, or that we both started riding a bike without training wheels at a super young age. After 1 year, Storyworth compiles all those questions and stories, including photos, into a beautiful keepsake book that the whole family can share for generations. I'm holding on to mine, and I'm going to personalize it with my kids and give a copy to them when they move out so that they can continue to add more history for their own kids. So, give all the mums in your life a meaningful gift that you'll both cherish for years. Storyworth. Right now, for a limited time, you'll save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/bescared. That's STORYWORTH.com/bescared to save $10 on your first purchase. Storyworth.com/bescared. This happened late in November of 2017, and it was a weekday. I can't remember what day exactly, but I knew that it wasn't a weekend as the roads were pretty desolate. I was 33 at that stage, and we'd been working for a family on a ranch for about 4 years, and they had become like our second family, I suppose. We were on work visas from South Africa, so not native to the US, but pretty familiar with everything as we had been in the area for the full 4 years that we had worked for them. We decided to make the career and life change after I got burnt out at 29 in a corporate marketing career that wasn't going anywhere and was stealing my soul and will to live. We just wanted to scale down and have a more relaxed lifestyle, I suppose. Anyway, the ranch was in northern Utah, somewhere between Salt Lake City and Logan. I'm being pretty vague as the family is very well known and I would not like to identify them as a respect for their privacy. but we were almost getting ready to return to South Africa at that stage as our visas were running out, and we wanted a bit of a holiday, I guess, as it had been a very busy year. Getting married, our daughter was born, etc. So we wanted to do a bit of sightseeing before we returned, and the owner offered to pay for the accommodation and provide spending money and his truck even if we would run an errand for him on the way. He had a couple of horses and a trailer that needed to be picked up from a ranch somewhere in Wyoming, with Cheyenne being the closest big city more than an hour away. We jumped at the opportunity as we basically had a week to get there and then a day to get back to his ranch. We visited some awesome places too. Park City, Flaming Gorge, Bear Lake, Yellowstone, Teton Village, etc. The whole trip was an amazing experience, except for the incident this story is about. That definitely put a bit of a damper on the excitement. We drove up to Park City the first day and spent the night with some friends there. And the incident happened on the second day of the trip, on the way between Flaming Gorge Reservoir and Bear Lake via Green River. So, we were driving and enjoying the scenery and had just crossed over the Utah-Wyoming border when we spotted the only vehicle for the past maybe 30-odd miles, an old red-brown pickup truck that was parked on the opposite side of the road. There were two guys inside, and when we were about maybe 150 feet from them, they pulled onto the road to make a U-turn. I was pretty annoyed by that as I was doing about 80 at the time and had to make a hard brake and swerve onto the oncoming traffic to avoid having an accident with them. I punched on the horn and flipped the middle finger out the window when I passed them too. They sped up, flashing the lights behind me, but I just punched it and left them behind. I was driving my employer's new Ram 2500 diesel truck, so it had no shortage in power to get away. A few miles down the road, I couldn't see them behind me anymore, so I assumed that they must have turned off. Probably about 40 to 50 miles up the road, we pulled into a Little America to get diesel and some food. When we got out of the shop, we saw the truck parked across the lot, but nobody was in it. We decided to load up and head out as I wasn't in the mood for an argument with some redneck cowboys. So we headed out and thought that was the last that we would see of them. But boy, were we wrong. We were looking for interesting places to stop and things to see on the route, and about 45 minutes or so after we left Little America, we spotted a sign that pointed to Fossil Butte National Monument. We pulled in and literally had the place to ourselves. We were the only car in the parking lot, so we walked around and couldn't see much as it was closed, so we decided to head out. But right as we got to the truck, we spotted the red pickup speeding into the parking lot. I panicked, my wife jumped into the back with our 5-month-old daughter, and I ran around and jumped into the driver's seat. Right as I wanted to pull out, the pickup pulled in behind us, blocking us from exiting. I was terrified at this point, screaming at my wife to call 911. The two guys jumped out of the truck and started running towards us, one on each side of the truck. Only then did I notice that both had their faces covered by what looked like handkerchiefs, like what cowboys usually wear around their necks. Right at this time as well, my wife said, panicking, that she didn't have cell service. I was making split-second decisions and noticed that, except for the curve and a signpost off to the left, there was nothing really solid in front of the truck. So I threw the truck into drive, swung the steering to the right and floored it. The truck bounced over the curb, plowed through the sagebrush, and made a wide turn through the field back toward the parking area, and we raced for the exit. Now, the layout of the parking lot was as follows. There's a one-way entrance, the road splits, and the parking runs into a one-way loop that exits at the same entrance. If it doesn't make sense, then you can pull it up on Google Maps with satellite view. That will explain it a little bit better. We were parked at the far end of the parking lot though, and we were now going through the parking the wrong way to get out. The other guys were back in their truck racing to cut us off. They beat us to the entrance too, as they had a much shorter distance to cover than we did. They proceeded to park their truck sideways across the road by the gate, so there was no way that we could get around without causing some serious damage to my boss's brand new truck. We stopped about 150 feet from them. One guy had an aluminum bat and the other had some sort of a bar or tire iron that he was swinging around. My wife was crying in panic, our daughter was screaming, and I was shaking from adrenaline and fear. And even though the situation was still dodgy, I felt like we were out of immediate danger at this point. The two guys didn't move towards us, just standing next to their truck staring us down. It felt like hours, but was probably less than a few minutes, and I told my wife to buckle our daughter in and look behind the seat for the rifle my boss kept there. She found it and passed it to me. I wasn't worried about the bat and the bar, but in case one of them had a firearm. Obviously, I didn't want to make the situation worse, so I was still contemplating whether I should use it if they approached or threatened us again, when I noticed a camper turning off the highway towards us. The two guys must have also noticed, as they looked at each other, got in their truck, and at that they just sped off. They turned the way that we came from onto the highway, but we could no longer see them, and so we started driving. We passed the camper and the old couple gave us a friendly wave. We wonder if they knew that to us they were angels sent from heaven that day, or probably not, right? And the story ends there, pretty anticlimactically. We had a pretty amazing but uneventful, at least if you count dodgy encounters, rest of the trip. We told my boss what happened when we returned, and his explanation was that they were probably looking for trouble, and that is why they cut us off with the U-turn, and then when people react, they start a confrontation. It sounded plausible at that stage, until about a week later when we were already back in South Africa. I was lying in bed one night thinking over the encounter when it just sort of struck me. From where we first encountered them, when they cut us off with the U-turn, until the Fossil Butte Visitor Center, was over 3 hours and close to about 120 miles. You don't follow someone that far unless you have some seriously sinister intentions. They also must have purposely followed us there, as there are many different routes that they could have taken that would have led them away from us, and we turned off the interstate and made about 2 or 3 other turns since leaving Little America too. And that certainly made me lie awake for a few more hours, wondering just what their intentions were and what would have happened if that old couple with the camper didn't turn off right when they did. This was 1992. My mother was going through a bad patch in her marriage and chemotherapy for breast cancer. We lived in a very quiet town where residential areas only had small markets. For everything else, including pharmacy and public calls, we had to go to the main market, which was almost 3.5 miles from our house, 1.5 miles from our apartment blocks to Main Road, and then 2 miles to the market, either by walk or by public transport. My mother, who was going through some tough times given my father's complete disconnect with us, she used to call her brother, my uncle, for advice and catharsis, who lived in another city. For those calls, she had to go to the public call office, PCO, which was run by 2 weird men. The same market had the pharmacy where my mother would buy her medicines. Now, I was 11 and my older sister was 17, and one evening, my mother, along with my sister, went to the PCO to talk to my uncle. I don't remember why, but I think my father asked her to leave the house and she wanted to discuss her options or something. She was in distress though and didn't realize that it was already late when she finished the call. The market was closed, so was the public transport. My mum and sister paid the bill and started their walk home on the path next to the main road. The 2 PC owners closed the PCO and started following them, one on foot right behind them trying to offer a ride and the other on a bicycle next to them on the deserted main road. My mother strictly refused, held my sister's hand tightly and started walking as fast as she could, when a white van appeared on the service road and started driving slowly next to them. The PCO guys had already arranged a ride with some really bad intentions and didn't seem to go away, but they were probably waiting for them to get off the main road to strike. On the next turn, though, 2 men came from the opposite side on the footpath, and to my mother's relief, it was the pharmacist and his friend who were returning to pick his car from his shop's parking after a walk. They saw the man in the van and they immediately realized what was going on. They stopped, said hello, and asked if she needed help. And they agreed to walk with them home, and the PCO guys fled upon seeing these guys. The kind pharmacist saw my mother and my sister to the safety of our house, thankfully, and my mother never went to that PCO ever again. Last week, my 10-year-old son B got sick one night, vomiting, fever, etc. So, the next morning I kept him home from school. I accidentally forgot to call the attendance line and report him absent. And about half an hour after school starting that morning, my fiancé called me from work freaking out asking where B was. I informed him that he was homesick, which my fiancé didn't know because he had left super early that morning for work. But apparently, the school had been frantically calling me. My phone never rang and I had no missed calls, and then called my fiancé because numerous students and teachers had seen B at breakfast, served before school starts. B is always there early for breakfast. But he was also absent from class when school began. Many students swore that they had seen B at breakfast, but B was acting weird and didn't respond to them and stuff like that. Very odd because B is a very outgoing and social person. It even escalated to the point that some students had seen B running onto the stage in the auditorium and hiding. Teachers were literally using flashlights to search, even up in the stage rafters for him because he had supposedly even been spotted up there. One of his best friends even called B from school that morning because she was worried and B's phone never rang. She also texted and, you guessed it, no text was received. The police had even been notified and were en route to the school, until my fiancé called me and I called the school immediately to inform them that B was homesick. I have tried to obtain more details about all of this, but even the school secretary seemed weirded out by it and was just like, okay, well, glad he's okay. Must have been another student that looks like him. From the info that I've gathered, though, nobody actually spoke to B that morning because he ignored us and just stared down at his food tray. When asked about what he was wearing, all I got was a hoodie and sweatpants, his usual everyday attire. Bottom line, this whole thing really freaked me out, his friends, and even his teachers. Do you guys have any idea about what happened here? My girlfriend and I were months away from being parents for the first time, and we were both working jobs. I worked in retail as a key holder. She was working as an assistant manager at a place in the local strip mall. After my shift one day, I took the deposit bag, wrapped it up in my work clothes, put all of that in a bag, and I went to walk for 5 or so minutes to my girlfriend's work. Just before I got to the door of the mall, though, a man came up and asked me if I could help start his car. He needs to get to work, but he can't do it himself. Now, growing up, my family had cars like that, so I was like, oh, must be the air intake or whatever, and said that I would help. We walk around the corner of the mall to where the car is sitting, and that's the car that I'm going to help start, I think to myself. But the man says, so we just need to get in and I'll drive you to my car. I need help starting it. And the hairs on the back of my neck start to rise. I have ignored gut instincts before. That's how I am with this girlfriend at this time, but this is a sensation that very clearly is telling me, ignore these psychological warnings at your certain peril. I quickly explained to him that I thought this was going to be a very quick thing and I have somewhere that I need to be and I'm already late. I apologize and walk away from him into the mall and watch him leave in the car before going to my girlfriend's workplace. I tell her that we're going to scrap our plans for dinner and make it home ASAP, dropping the deposit bag along the way. As we're passing the parking lots to head to the bank in a roundabout way, we see the same dude who was in a hurry to get to work, slowly driving around a Target parking lot, just scoping people out. There is no doubt in my mind that I would have certainly regretted getting into a car with that man that day. In fact, there's a good chance that I wouldn't be sharing this story today if I had. I want to share an experience that I had while training with my NG unit at Fount McCoy in WI. I've not ever been big into paranormal activity as a subject of interest. I originally got into these topics by just gawking at some of the more outlandish things, but the deeper I dug, the more I found what seems to be genuine people sharing real experiences. This place in particular strikes me as largely honest and pretty earnest. In that spirit, I wanted to share a story about one of the few unexplainable instances that have happened in my life, certainly the most significant. So, I'm a member of the NG in Wisconsin. I moved from enlisted to officer via ROTC and was attached to a unit in my prospective MOS while in the program. I don't really want to give specifics on my service, as the community is small enough to identify me to peers in the unlikely circumstance that they're here. But in 2014, my platoon decided to conduct nighttime land navigation at Fount McCoy from 2030 to 0030. While the Army is typically all about buddy pairs, Nightland Nav is one of the few cases that we can do things solo if we so choose. Having done Nightland Nav plenty before, I step off alone, compass, map, and headlamp in hand. For those of you who don't know, land navigation involves seeking out markers on a course by plotting their coordinates on a map and moving there via terrain reference and compass. At night, this is typically done without light as much as possible. When light is used, it is red. This minimizes damage to night vision. Ostensibly, these methods also keep you concealed in a tactical environment when employed with noise discipline. I bring this up so that you can understand a few things about my circumstance. You see, I was moving through the woods while making a token effort to be hard to spot or hear. The woodland that I was in is part of a larger forest system, but was frequently travelled. That night, we had some 15-ish soldiers clumping around. My illumination was a toggle label headlamp, but was toggled to be red when turned on. To cycle to white light, I have to turn it off twice. The cycle was off, solid white, off, flashing white, off, solid red, off, flashing red, off, solid white. My assigned points will take me to the other side of the course and back. A good hour and a half of walking as the crow flies. They're more or less in a straight line, so I estimate 2.5 hours out and back. I know if I come back too early, though, I might be given another set of points. So I resolve to walk out, take a break for an hour, then just mosey on back. But the first half of this goes as planned, too. I get my points without much trouble and wind up sitting on a hillside at around 10 at night. It's cloudy, but the moon is full. I can see wellish when the sky is clear, poorly when it's not. Occasionally, I see a red light blobbing off in the distance below me. Once, a pair of platoon members passed down the hill from me, using white light to try and read their map. I startled them when I asked if they needed help. At the end of my break, there's no more motion in my area. Most people had likely already walked out and back, or they were too lost and took the handrailing road home. I'm feeling pretty at one with my surroundings, having sat in the same spot eating stale Skittles for a good long while. Owls hoot, trees sway, and all is well. I trot down my hill and step through some brush. I'm in a clearing where prairie intersects forest. There are some dead trees in the area. One of them is split halfway up, and at the top, maybe 15 feet, I can make out a head and shoulders silhouette against the clouds backlit by the moon. I walk up to ask how they got up there and if they're stuck, when the shadow twitches and I get the impression that it's turned toward me. I stand there looking at it, and it's maybe looking at me, but the situation feels off. I'm not going to let a battle buddy punk me or anything, so I ask if they need a hand. Mid-sentence, the moonlight comes back, and it's clear that the thing on the tall stump is not a soldier. This moonlight glimpse is the best look that I get at this thing. It looks like a stretched-out bald person. Its long arms are clutching the stump. I can't make out the face, but it looks pinched. By that I mean I couldn't see its eyes or mouth, like they were small and in the middle of its head. It's skinny like it hasn't eaten, but It's tall and obviously strong to have made such a vertical climb like that. It was definitely facing me. It probably was the whole time that I was in the clearing, in fact. Maybe since I came down the hill, even. Maybe my speech startled it. Whatever the case, I swear loudly. It rapidly scurries down the trunk. I flick on my red light and catch it on all fours moving toward the brush line in the direction that I'm heading. Automatically, I keep toggling the lamp to be in white light. That means it goes off, then to flashing red. In the flash, I see the thing at the wood line, but I think that it's flipped around and is backing in, probably to keep its eyes on me. In the few seconds it takes for me to get to white light, though, it's gone. I scan the tree line, which is silent. But when it moved, there was a scraping noise, plus the woodland brush is dense. If it was still running, I would hear it. I reasoned that it must have stopped. It must still be watching me. I fumbled out my knife and keep looking around the woods in front of me. After ages, I start inching along a perpendicular path to my initial route of travel, an angle that will link me up with the hardball road that runs up and down the side of the course. Once on the road, I can take it back to where my platoon is parked. My major problem is that the road is 10 minutes of walking away from my current position, mostly woodland too. That can't be helped. I have to get out of the clearing first. My progress on that front is painfully slow though. I'm fighting my natural urge to freeze in place like a deer in headlights. After sidestepping a good 10 meters, I hear a corresponding rustling and think that I see movement. Whatever it is though, it's enough to get me to turn and bolt, right into a downed log which trips me. I scramble up to my feet and look back to the wood line where there is an audible commotion now. I glimpse a leg and a butt moving back into the woods. At this point I'm done with the whole situation, but don't want to run again. I start power walking to the road, turning to look as much as I can while seeing what this thing is doing. Over the movement of my own kit too, I can hear it moving alongside of me parallel. As I near the end of the clearing, I think that I hear it picking up pace as if to cut me off. I make the decision to sprint, and when I enter the woods my path is clear, but I think that I can hear it in my periphery. I don't stop, and run hard until I hit the paved road. I bite it hard too a few times along the way, but recover with a frantic speed that I cannot consciously replicate. And once on the road, I run perpendicular to the forest until I don't think I hear it anymore. I'm now winded from my breakout run. From the middle of the road, have good visibility and decide to walk to catch my breath. It's quiet for a while, but then I hear a branch move around 30 feet in the air from the woods that I had just fled. I snap my gaze up, see a pale, ovular face, half in shadow, peeking at me from around a trunk, and at that, I just take off again. After way too long, I make it back to the headlights of our LMTVs, and it's now 12:15. What happened, Cadet? Did you get lost out there? You're covered in mud. Did you fall down? Why are you out of breath? I got lost on my way back. Yeah, I rolled down Pikes Peak. I ran to get back in time. They all start laughing. I know better than to claim that I saw a monster. Already my reaction had left me feeling foolish, to be honest. But in the years since drilling at FMC, I have never experienced anything like that again. McCoy does not have a history of disappearances as far as I know. Neither do the closest towns, Sparta and Toma. I've done Nightland Nav alone a few times since without issue. This is... To be honest though, this is less from courage and more from me deciding that I must have misinterpreted the situation. But after diving into paranormal subjects, I'm coming around to the idea that, well, I should probably trust my own account. Maybe the world is weirder than I first thought. If anyone has had similar experiences elsewhere, or hopefully an explanation, then please do let me know. And thanks for making it this far. Back in 2016, my friends and I for the longest time had been itching to go camping to our local camping site in the Los Padres National Park in Southern California. When we found the perfect weekend to go that didn't interfere with any of our work schedules, we set the date. 3 days before the trip, we found out that we were going to get hit by the El Nino rainstorm. Us, being the type of dudes that we are though, didn't care if we got hit by the storm while camping. So we backed up our cars and made the 45-minute drive to the campsite. The campsite was a family-friendly one where there were about 100 camping lots that circled around the clearing in the forest. We found the perfect spot that was underneath huge thick trees that should help block out as much rain as possible, and it helped out that the restrooms were only like 30 yards away too. Now, as soon as we got to our spot, we took advantage of the afternoon sky being cleared for the moment, and we rushed to set up our spot. The layout that we did was that we pitched our tents close by, where our tent doors were only 6 feet apart. The reason why we did this too is because, in order to combat the rain, I bought a 30-foot by 30-foot thick blue canopy tarp that I threw over to cover us from the rain above, and from the rain that would be running through the ground as well. In hindsight, it was a genius move on my part. What this meant is that whenever you walked around the tent, you would be making heaps of noise from crunching through the plastic tarp. Anyway, hours passed and we're all around the campfire. It was late in the evening, and this was the first time that I noticed that there were barely any other campers. They were mainly camping in their RVs, like the fake campers that they seemed to be. In honest opinion too, they were the smart ones really, unlike my friends and I that were sleeping in 2 small tents, with our only protection being the blue tarp. I was getting tired from a long day at work though, and I decided that I was going off to knock out. My friends followed my lead as well because they were getting pretty tired too. The way that the sleeping arrangements were was that I had my friend Ray sleeping in my tent, and AJ and S were sleeping in theirs. Before I called it a night though, I whispered to Ray and told him I'm going to prank call S and AJ, but I'm not going to say anything. Ray smiled as I dialed my friends up. I called them on restricted, and S's phone started to ring off. Both of them, being the way that they are, got timid very easily, and they said to one another, "Who's calling you this late at night?" "I don't know, they called me unrestricted." "Are you going to answer?" "Of course not." Ray and I were holding our laughter as they ignored our call. I decided to do it one more time too. And once their phones started to ring, they started to freak out once again, and they said, "Who is it this time?" "Same person, I think. I'm going to answer." And as they did answer, S said in a very shaky tone, "Hello." Ray and I had to hold in our laughter as we kept as quiet as possible, but not wanting to make any noises that would give off that it was actually us. I held the phone close to my mouth as I began to breathe heavily in a sort of murderous way. I ended the call, and just hearing them freak out the way that they did was making my night much more fun. Me being the idiot that I am, I called them one more time, and this time S picked up the phone immediately and said in a tough voice, "Look, whoever this is, they better stop. I'm about to call the cops if you keep on calling. This is not a threat." Ray and I looked at each other as we, at the same time, began to fake moan as loud and immediately started to bawl out in laughter. AJ and S were so mad at us for pulling this prank on us, and they were cursing us out. We, finally calming down from laughing so loudly, eventually told the boys. I told them good night, and I told them that I'd make up for it by making them pancakes and have it ready in the morning. Since I fell asleep relatively easily too, I was out in a matter of minutes, while Ray, AJ, and S were up for a while longer. I was the first of the friends to wake up in the morning, and as I promised, I had the pancakes ready cooking by the time that anybody else woke up. The smell of my cooking woke my friends up, and one by one they got out of their tents. As we were eating, AJ spoke up and said, "Hey Jay, that prank that you pulled last night went a little too far. Yeah, you had us ready to run out to the car and take off." Me, feeling a bit guilty, apologized and said, "Sorry guys, my bad. Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to prank call us like that, but then to walk around our tent and then go inside it in the middle of the night is totally out of limits," S said. Me, not knowing what they were talking about now, said, "What do you guys mean?" "Now, come on, still with the jokes? You were the one that was walking around our tent and you walked in." Ray spoke up and said, "That wasn't Jay who was walking around. I thought that was you two getting your revenge on us for scaring you. That wasn't us doing that. It was you two. So, to explain, after I fell asleep, about maybe an hour had passed where Ray, S, and AJ were still up and all was quiet in the forest, until the sounds of footsteps were heard stepping on our blue tarp that was on the ground. At first, my friends thought that it could have just been a forest animal wandering around, but the heavy footsteps were a dead giveaway that it was a person. As they described, the person was walking all around our tents, making constant figure eights, sort of. The person would place their fingers on the tent's fabric walls to run them up and down. The footsteps finally stopped after a couple of minutes, right in between our tent doors. The three of them were already having their hearts pounding out of their chest. It was silent for a long time, until the sound of the tent's zipper slid open. As AJ says, the tent's door was only sort of halfway open, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. But in the darkness, both S and AJ saw the silhouette of a man's face pop his head into the tent to look at both of them. AJ and S faked being asleep the entire time, but they kept their eyes locked onto the man. The man then opened the tent fully and walked inside the tent, just standing at the entrance. The man didn't say a word or do anything, just sort of watched the both of them laying in their sleeping bags. After a long minute, the man just took his steps out of the tent and his footsteps were heard walking away, disappearing into the night. The entire time that this was happening, S and AJ thought that it was either me or Ray doing this, and Ray thought it was either AJ or S doing this. Back to us arguing back and forth at the breakfast table, but we were interrupted by a man walking to our campsite and he said, "Good morning, boys. How did the four of you sleep last night?" This man spoke in a smoker's voice too, as if he'd been going at it for like 45 years of being alive. He wore a dirty, sweat-stained white t-shirt that looked more grey at this point, and his blue jeans looked like they'd never been taken off. He smelt like liquor, not a good sign at 8 in the morning, mind you, and his words were just sort of mumbling around. We didn't say a word to this guy, as he then asked us if we had any cigarettes to spare him. I said that we didn't smoke, and he said, "Oh, well, if you boys want to visit me in my RV, just stop by any time." The man continued to walk away towards the restrooms, and as he was done using it, he walked back to our campsite again. He didn't say anything this time, but he looked at us and gave us a nearly toothless smile, and then he just walked back to his RV. I took note of his RV, as it was the only RV that was stuck out as being dirty and more rundown than the others, but we quickly summed up the man as the person who was walking around our tents last night, and S and AJ now remembered that they also smelt liquor from the person who was standing in their tent. We all agreed that we would keep an extra eye out on this guy, and if he did spend another night, that we would most likely report him to the park rangers if he tried anything else. It was around lunchtime now, and the man came back, not to use the restroom, but just to talk to us. "So, are any of you boys interested in buying an RV? You all can go check it out right now and see if you want to buy it. I don't need it anymore since my wife left me. But just check out the inside of the RV, man." No, we don't need one. We're good," I said with a visible threatening tone. The man seemed to notice this, and he walked away again. The man ended up leaving a few hours before sunset, but the entire time that he was there, he just kept glancing at us. Mind you, the man had his RV about 50 yards away from us, and I noticed that he had a restroom right next to his RV too. So why did he make any effort in walking all the way over to our campsite just to use our restroom? Also, why did he even use ours if RVs come with restrooms installed in them, right? Whatever the man wanted, we were just glad that we were about to enjoy the rest of our weekend without him.